are in listen-only mode.
Hi everybody, welcome to the 4 influencing strategies. My name's Tim Baker, for those of you who I haven't met. Looking forward to working with you for this short, sharp session, which is basically around my latest book, the New Influencing Toolkit. So I'll talk a little bit about that later. So I think one of the reasons that I have written this book, and one of the primary motivations, is really that I don't think there's much out there, frankly, on influencing skills. At one end of the continuum, we've got very salesy type influencing books that are very good for salespeople, but perhaps not so good for managers and leaders. And then at the other end of the continuum, we've got fairly academic type of material, which isn't really useful in a practical sense. So I thought I'd try and straddle those two ends of the continuum and come up with something that I think is practical but's got some rigor to it. So I hope you enjoy the process. Now, as the normal process here, if you've got questions, please type them into the question box over on the right-hand side, and I'll answer those at the end. So I'll finish a little bit earlier, and then we'll have some question and answers. But as you think of a question, type it in there, so in case you forget it, and that means that we won't have an awkward pause at the end while you're typing in your question. So as you think of it, please put it into the question box there on the right-hand side. Okay, let's get underway. So if you look at these 4 leaders, and of course they're all famous, and that's certainly one thing they've got in common, but I'd ask you the question, what do these 4 leaders have in common? Now, obviously 3 of them are no longer with us, and 1 still is, so that's obviously not it. And I guess the fact that they're all famous, that's obviously a commonality as well. But these 4 people, whether we like them or not, and they seem to have we seem to have very strong opinions about these people, but whether we like them or not, the reality is they've all been highly influential. So that's what they have in common. In their own way, they've been enormously influential. Now, the interesting thing about these 4 leaders, and I'm going to refer to them quite a bit through the presentation, is that these 4 leaders have each used a particular influencing strategy. And as you could probably imagine, each of them are using one of the 4 strategies for influence that I'm going to talk about in this session. So let's move on. There's 2 things I hope that you get out of this presentation. I think one of the things I'd like to think that you can get out of this presentation is to identify the 4 influencing strategies, and I'm going to share those with you. And while I'm going through that, you might like to think, well, which of those would I most likely use when I'm influencing other people? Because we've all got an influencing profile. We tend to influence people how we like to be influenced, but often this is very unconscious. So some of us will use facts and figures, some of us will tug at the heartstrings, others will try and take them with us. Others will try and talk about the pros and cons, and so forth. So we all use these styles, and we've all had situations where we've tried to persuade somebody and found that we didn't get anywhere. The glaze went in the eyes and we just didn't seem to be able to connect. So we've all been there, and I guess when that sort of thing happens, what we tend to do is we tend to default to what we feel most comfortable with, and we try to continually influence that person. So if we're throwing facts and figures at them, we'll throw even more facts and figures at them, only to find that we're not connecting. So hopefully by using the 4 styles, all 4 styles, you'll be far more influential than you currently are. But just remember, my blind spot and your blind spot is the fact that we use one of the 4 too often and in the wrong situation. Sometimes we're not aware of it. The other thing I'm hoping that you get out of this presentation is some very practical tools to help you maximize your capacity to influence. Now, the book has 64 tools in it. Obviously, I can't go through 64 in our session, but I'm going to pick the eyes out of some that I think might be very powerful and useful for you so that you can start to build your influencing capabilities from using a different form or different types of strategies. Okay, so let's be clear about this. What am I talking about when I'm talking about influence? So as soon as we talk about influence, all sorts of images pop into our mind, and some of those images aren't very positive. Often we think about influence as a manipulative, cunning type of approach where people might twist people's arm or try to do things that are underhanded. I'm not in any way suggesting that that's what we're trying to do here. What I am suggesting here is that with the definition there, that I think that influence is the power to make other people agree with your opinions or get them to do what you want willingly and ethically. Those three words are very important. So yes, it is about using power. Yes, it is about getting people to do things because they want to, not just because you want to. And yes, it is ethical in the sense that we're doing it in a very transparent way. So let's be absolutely clear about what I mean by influence up front, and that everything that I'm going to suggest to you in this presentation is around using power willingly and ethically. Now, I think the other point, and I guess in a way I'm preaching to the converted, you wouldn't be in the work in this particular environment now, listening to this presentation, if you didn't believe this. But at the end of the day, every single one of us is in the business of influence. And whether you're a salesperson, whether you're a manager, whether you're an engineer, whether you're a musician, whoever you are in the influencing business. So really, if that's the case, then it's very important that we actually learn to be more effective at it than perhaps we currently are. Now, there are three variables in any influencing situation. Now, if you think about it, you've got a preferred style, and so have I. I've got a preferred approach, and so have you. But the person or persons that you're influencing, and I mention this because sometimes it might be in a one-on-one situation, and at other times it might be very much in a group situation. So whichever the case may be, we're obviously trying to influence or persuade somebody else. And and each of those people have their own personal style and approach. So if we use our style and it's not congruent with the other person's style, then that may well result in a lack of influence. And of course, the third variable that's critical in all this is the context, the situation that you and I are confronted with. So when we're put in certain situations, certain types of influence is more relevant. So for example, if we're investigating a workplace incident, probably what we need to do is to have some rigorous research or investigation into that. So without having done our investigation or research, it's likely that we're not going to be particularly influenced by your suggested or recommended approach. So those three things are absolutely critical. And as I said before, the blind spot for you and I is the first bullet point, our own preferred style. And the more committed we are to that particular influencing strategy, the more likely we are to use it. And the more likely we are to use it, the less likely we are to be influencing people who don't have that particular strategy. So hopefully I can create a little bit of awareness through this presentation to see what those styles might be. Okay, so what you're seeing on the screen there is a very simple model. And the model there is my influencing framework, which of course is in the book. And as I said before, there are very few models out there that are useful and practical. Many of them are very esoteric or fairly flimsy. So I kind of thought, well, what are the variables involved? And as you'll notice up the top, we've got a push and a pull style. And across on the right-hand side, we've got a logical and an emotional approach. And each of those in combination create 4 influencing strategies. So let's have a look at the push-pull style to start with. So what do I mean by push and pull? And we've probably heard that terminology a little bit, but people who like to use the push style of influencing tend to be quite directive, usually quite assertive, usually quite structured, and they're often in the business of giving information, They are often, they'll often move with their own ideas and can be quite dynamic. So when you do the diagnostic, and you won't get a chance obviously today to do that, but if you purchase the book, you can do the diagnostic. It'll tell you first up whether you've got a push style or a pull style. Now, a pull style is a far more collaborative style. That is taking people with you. So this is about testing, understanding, and seeking out information and building on that. So each of us are predisposed to one of those styles. Now, when you do the diagnostic, you might actually find that your scores are very even, which in actual fact is not a bad situation to be in, because what that suggests is that you can fluctuate quite easily from a push style to a pull style, depending on the circumstances that you're in. Now, the other two are the logical and emotional approaches. So let's talk a little bit about that. People who like to influence using logic will tend to use and rely on facts and evidence, and they're quite rational. They're very structured in their approach, very measured in their approach. So these sort of people we would know very easily when we come across them. And obviously there are certain professions that lend themselves to that type of approach. So have a think about yourself. Do you tend to try to influence other people using logic? And of course, the inverse is true, that you would probably also be likely to be influenced by other people who are logical, systematic, and methodical. Now, the other approach, below the line as I call it, is the emotional approach to influencing. That is using people's feelings and perceptions and having very much a values-based approach to influencing. So people who like to use the emotional approach will tend to tug at the heartstrings and be very good at getting people excited and inspired and on board and enthusiastic about a proposal. And again, when you do the results, if you find that you're very much between those two, then it's likely that you can see the sense in both of those proposals. But on the other hand, if you've got a strong score in the logical or a strong score in the emotional, it's likely that you would use that quite a lot, and it's not always going to be effective because you're going to come across people who have an opposite approach or prefer an opposite approach. So what this particular model or framework has now defaulted to is 4 influencing strategies. Investigation, which is a push logical style. Calculation, which is a pull logical style or approach. Motivation, which is a push emotional strategy. And collaboration, which is a pull emotional strategy. So we're going to obviously delve deeper and have a look at those 4 leaders, and you could probably imagine those 4 leaders fall into these categories very easily. And I'm sure once you start thinking about them in action, you'll understand that that's their particular style or approach. And of course, all 4 were very effective at using these. And my suggestion to you is to try to become good at the ones that you feel least comfortable with. So in other words, you should be very flexible in your approach. If I walked up to somebody that knew you particularly well and I showed them this model and I said, now where would you put him or her on this model? What do you think? Do you think they're investigation, collaboration, motivation, or calculation? The answer that you would want is, I don't know. Sometimes they use this approach, sometimes they use that style. It's hard to tell. That's the sort of answer that you want. You don't want people to say, oh, he's always investigating, or she's always attempting to motivate people, because what that means is that you've been typecast into a particular influencing style and approach, which isn't necessarily helpful when you're dealing with other people that don't necessarily warm to that approach. Now what you can see on the screen here is I've built this up even further now, so we've now got, you can now see that there are 16 competencies, or capabilities is perhaps the better word. So there's 16 capabilities there, and there's 4 for each. And So what happens is when you've done the diagnostic, it actually shows you your sub-scores, if you like, and the sub-scores gives you some idea within that particular strategy what you need to work on and what you're actually very comfortable using. So you can get some sort of idea of what they mean, and most of those are pretty self-explanatory, and I won't run through them in great detail other than to say that it really does break it down into 4 particular capabilities. And the idea again is to try to build on those capabilities where you have a low score and look for opportunities where you could actually exercise some influence using some of the tools in the book to help you build that particular capability of influence. Right, so let's go through now and actually look at the 4 influencing strategies, and at the same time look at some of the people that you might consider are good at using that particular style. All right, so first up, investigators, remember it's a push style, so investigators are quite assertive, quite directional, and it's also based on facts and figures. So people who use the Inquisitive Investigator style do their homework. They're usually very good at debating. They're usually very good at prosecuting an argument, often very good in situations where they're working with groups of people and have to convince them of a particular strategy or approach based on logic. So obviously Al Gore was a classic example of that, and Al Gore, when he was Vice President of the United States, was a devastating debater. That was one of his great strengths, and very much a detailed person, and obviously subsequent to his time in the White House, he spent a considerable amount of time on the road talking about climate change. And if you've ever seen any of his videos, you'll know that they are filled with graphs, charts, statistics, whole bunches of information. And some people might say it's information overload, but of course, because that's his style and that's his approach, he's likely to warm to the investigator approach. So if you think about people who are predisposed, or occupations, if you like, that are predisposed to investigation, police, obviously the whole purpose of police is to prosecute a case, to gather evidence, to put a compelling argument about the guilt of somebody who's been charged with an offence, and to convince or influence a judge or a jury based on the evidence that they have. Scientists and researchers, of course, are in the business of putting together a hypothesis. They then go away and gather evidence to demonstrate the validity of that hypothesis, and that's their bread and butter. That's what they do. So there's a couple of occupations that fit very nicely in the inquisitive investigator mode. So in a workplace, if you're a manager or a leader, a context where you would use investigation would be workplace incidents, as I mentioned earlier. So there's been a safety accident in the workplace, or there's been a harassment allegation made. Then it would be expected that whoever that allegation was made to would go and investigate that. They might go and interview, they might go and gather some documents, they might go and talk to various people, but they'd be expected to have some kind of validity as to what they think actually occurred in that incident. So that would be an approach where you would use that. Where you wouldn't use it is large-scale change initiatives where you want people on board. So you might start by talking about some of the facts and logic behind an approach, but at the end of the day, if you need people to come with you, this is not necessarily the right approach. You need to go below the line and use more of an emotional type of approach to get people on board. So, and I see this all the time with leaders who are very strong investigators who will use facts and figures when in actual fact they should be using other approaches. Okay, so Um, the next one is the calculator. So let's talk about the calculator as such. People who like to calculate, they use positives proposals, and they highlight the weaknesses of the current position. So these people will often use, they'll either say you're with me or you're against me. There's no sitting on the fence. And these people will make a compelling argument for the reason why we should go down a particular road, and a compelling argument why, if we don't go down this road, what the consequences will be. If you walked into a computer shop this afternoon and you actually said to that particular person, or you walked in the shop and there was a sign at the door saying 40% off all laptops, obviously that would get your attention, particularly if you're looking to purchase a new computer. As you walk into the store, there's another sign there that says need to purchase by the close of business today. Now, if you get that kind of, that's a classic retail leverage approach, which is based on the calculation strategy. So calculation is very much about pointing out the positives about a situation and talking about the negatives of not going down that road. And no greater exponent of that was the late Margaret Thatcher. People either loved her or they hated her. There was nothing in between. And the reason for that was that she was very clear about where people stood with her. So when she was articulating a proposal, she would make it crystal clear what the benefits of this proposal were and what the downfalls of not going down this road were. So people knew exactly where they stood with her. So these people are usually very good at debating as well, and are very good at prosecuting a case, pros and cons. So if you think about people that are very good at that sort of thing, you've got salespeople. Salespeople are as I said before, they're very good at talking up the benefits of a product, and they're also good at actually mentioning what the downfalls of a product are. Financial advisors are the same. You can walk out of a meeting with a financial advisor and think you've got no option other than to take the advice of the financial advisor. Animal trainers, I took my youngest daughter to the circus a couple of months ago, and there was the trainer. They had a whip in one hand and some treats in the other, and the animal was in no doubt about where they stood with the trainer. So animal trainers use calculation to influence the behaviour of animals. Teachers as well, and if you actually cast your eyes back and think about a teacher that you really respected and admired at school, I will guarantee to you that they were very good at this style of influence. You knew exactly where you stood with them. So situations in the workplace that require this, if you have to sell the positives of an approach, you would do that. And then if you had to talk about the consequences of not going down this road, you could also articulate that as well. But situations that are vague and unclear are really not open to this style of influence, because people aren't clear what the situation is. So if you're actually looking at your belief that we should create a new market for a product, well, you need to demonstrate that in a different format, because there's no good talking about the pros and cons if people don't know that there is actually a market there. So that approach won't work. Now, motivators, we're now going below the line, because the motivators now, remember, using a push style, so still quite assertive, and also an emotional approach rather than a logical approach. So these people are big picture idealists. So they'll talk in very big pictures, and motivators will often convince people via their stories or the way they phrase things. They're usually quite emotional, and they can inject emotion and engender emotion in other people. So the obvious person that I could think of there was Martin Luther King. And if any of you have seen a video on YouTube of his great speech, I Have a Dream, you will notice that he's really trying to motivate people. And in fact, he moved a nation, he moved a generation through that very speech. If you haven't seen it, I strongly recommend you go and have a look at that, because it's a brilliant example of a motivator in action. And I should say to you that this is not you don't need to be a great public speaker in order to be a great motivator. Although most great public speakers are motivational, you don't necessarily have to be. Telling stories is a really brilliant way of being able to do that. Storytelling is one of the best ways of actually motivating and influencing, because you are very much detaching yourself from the story and painting a picture of a reality, so that people start to be emotionally engaged with that particular story. So entrepreneurs, of course, use motivation as an influencing style. They'll normally get a group of people together and get them totally committed to a cause or their vision or their idea. Advertising executives only have a very short space of time to actually convince people of their proposal, so they would use the motivational strategy, tugging at the heartstrings. Artistic directors have to deal with a whole bunch of stakeholders and keep the show on the road, and they very much got to remind people of what the big picture is. So when you're developing a new strategic direction and you require the hearts and minds of people, this is of course a perfect opportunity to be able to influence by using motivation. But if you're unclear, or they're unclear more to the point, about the reason or the rationale for a new initiative, such as, for example, unexpected cost cutting, then they're not going to be necessarily convinced by somebody who's really tugging at the heartstrings. They'll probably want to know the substance, the facts, and the logic behind that before they're actually convinced. So the collegial collaborator. Now, collaborators, and by its name you can probably determine what that style is, they like to take people with them. They still use an emotional approach, but they like to persuade people by involving them in the decision-making process. So they're very good at stakeholder management and engagement. And what they do is they build teams and they work together towards achieving an objective. And usually these people are extremely good at team building, and they're very mindful of not fracturing the team. And the best example I could think of there was Mother Teresa. She was brilliant at getting together coalitions of support for the poor people in Calcutta. She was able to get government agencies on side. She was able to get many of the church groups on side through her process of collaboration, which worked extremely well for her. So the conductors of an orchestra. A conductor of an orchestra doesn't actually play an instrument, but they have many, many people that do. And their job is actually to collaborate with the musicians in order to create the right ensemble and sound. Funeral directors are another example where they have a number of different stakeholders in very delicate situations where they have to work with other people to achieve a result or a project. And choreographers are the same. So there's some clear professions that might use collaboration on a regular basis. Now, where you have, and I think this is often misunderstood, but where you have a situation where people are basically, there's strong views one way or the other in a team. So let's say that you're leading a team where there's a very strong view one way and a very strong view the other. The worst thing you can actually do is not to air those views, because all that does is entrench those views. So one of the best things to do there is to get everyone together and to talk about their points of view and get others to have a listen and set some ground rules around giving people respect to give their point of view. And by doing that, you've got a very good chance of being able to find the common threads. And the common threads are the way to collaborate and to build teams. Now, where you wouldn't use it is if people need to know the logic and the rationale behind a decision, such as the introduction of a new customer relationship system. This is not the right way to go. They don't want to be involved and engaged in a particular collaborative situation. They want to know the facts. They want to know the logic, and they want you to argue that. So clearly, the style to use there is very much an investigation and collaboration style or approach, which is very much around logic. Okay, so what I'd like to do now is just spend a little bit of time talking about some of the tools that you can use that are in my book, and you could use these tools very much to use any of the four strategies. So one of the best ways of actually using investigation is to use third-party endorsements. Obviously, authors do this. On the back cover, they have some celebrity that makes a very glowing endorsement of the book, and people may well be compelled to buy as a result of that. So if you're giving a presentation or you're talking to people and you're aware of other people that support the proposal who may well be respected inside or outside the organisation, use them to endorse the particular approach. Structured interviews are very powerful, and that's what we use, of course, when we recruit people. We ask the same questions to different people in order to gain some idea of who is the right person for the job. Conducting a survey, if it's done correctly, can also be a source of influence via investigation. And a process map, by mapping out visually the various steps in a project and actually looking at the bits and pieces there in the project that may be problematic, can be a very good way of investigating. Now, calculation, remember, this is pros and cons. This is talking about the positives and talking up the positives and talking about the consequences of not accepting a proposal. A force field analysis, Kurt Lewin's model, which was a very simple process of drawing a line down the center of a page. On the left-hand side, what are all the driving forces for change? And then on the right-hand side, what are all the restraining forces? And if the driving forces are stronger than the restraining forces, then it's likely that there's a good argument that that's the way we need to go. Using a cost-benefit analysis in terms of a proposal that's going to cost money, what are the costs associated with the proposal and what are the benefits that we're likely to get from that proposal, can be a very effective way at being able to demonstrate that the proposal has validity. And after an event, and of course the military use after-action reviews all the time, after an event, a very useful strategy is actually then to do a debrief. What worked, what didn't work, and what will we do differently as a result of what we've learned from the experience. And that can be a very powerful way of actually influencing people to a course of action based on a real life experience. So calculation, there's three strategies you can use. Now, motivation, what can you do? How can you get people to, how can you influence people via motivation? One of the best ways of building a team, I think, and certainly it's underrated as well, is a team values charter. Is actually getting each person around the room who've just formed into a team to answer 4 questions. 1, if there was one value you would like to see operate in this team, what would it be? 2, explain what that definition means. 3, why is it important to you? And 4, what behaviours would demonstrate that value in action? So by doing that, you're creating a charter, you're engaging people, you are involving people in a higher cause, which is about teamwork, and it can be highly effective if it's done correctly. Although there's a lot of cynicism around values in organisations, the truth is if it's done well and it's done in that sort of context, it can be very powerful. Many of you would be aware of the GROW model. GROW model stands for goal, reality, options, where to from here. So working with other people, what are you trying to achieve, which is the goal? What's the current reality, the R? What are your options, O? And W, where to from here, and what can I do to assist? Can be a very effective way to get people to arrive at their own conclusions. And of course, using good news stories, starting your meetings, going around the table and saying good news stories, and just for a few minutes getting people to share with the rest of the group some positive things that have been going on in the workplace over the last week or fortnight can be a very powerful and uplifting way of building morale in an organisation. But it's curious how that doesn't seem to happen very often. We tend to go around the room and say, tell us all the bad news. What about we actually start with the good news? It can be a very effective way of getting people on the right foot. And finally, what are some collaboration tools that you can use? Well, as the late Stephen Covey said in the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, begin with the end in mind. In other words, as a leader, it's good to suggest to people that this is what we hope to achieve out of this meeting and set people the goal, and then ask people then to collaborate with you in order to achieve that goal. So it can be a very powerful process to do. Giving feedback, of course, is a collaborative tool because good feedback is actually two-way. You're actually asking the people to reflect on their own particular work before you give your particular critique. And by doing that, it becomes a very collaborative exercise and can be very, very powerful if done correctly. But again, people often neglect doing that for all sorts of reasons, particularly about opening up a can of worms, which sometimes needs to be opened. Using a problem-solving approach, actually working with a group of people, working through a proposal or a problem, can be a very powerful collaborative strategy. And in a one-on-one situation, or even in a group situation, using paraphrasing and active listening skills is a source of collaboration to let the other party know that you're actually listening to what they have to say. So there's some tools that you can use, and my suggestion is to, once you've had a go at actually looking at the survey, and you found that you're probably lacking in one of those 4 strategies, the idea is to start to inject some of those strategies and tools into your daily work with people, and that bolsters up your capacity to influence by broadening the array of possibilities of doing so. Now, when you do the survey, you find that what happens is that, it's your opinion. So therefore, of course, there is a weakness to that because, we all like to think we do certain things at certain times, but sometimes it's best to get other people to complete the survey for us. So I just mention this because one of the tools that I have available is that I have a 360-degree methodology which allows other people to confidentially consider how people are faring. So we've got, you can see there's just a couple of examples there of some statements, and people have made comments about those statements. So for example, just look at 76. Generally, my team members seem quite willing to be open with me. The person filling out that survey said, yeah, I think that's true. Yes, I think they are open with me. The boss says, and in this case there were 3 bosses, all 3 said yes, very open. But interestingly, if you look at the team perspective, 56% agreed, so only 5 out of 9 could bring themselves to agree that their boss, that I could be willing to, I felt okay about being open with my boss, and 4 out of 9 sat on the fence. So that lends itself to the question, why is it that the bosses think you're open but not the team? So there can be some coaching that goes with that as well. So I just mention that because whilst I think there's a lot of rigor in the survey itself, I think the methodology of completing it yourself can have some flaws, and sometimes it's better to actually get other people to fill it out for you. So I'd just like to mention that. The other thing I'd like to mention before we finish up and take some questions is that I have developed a one-day in-house workshop. The one-day in-house workshop is based on the book, and in fact the book itself becomes part of the workshop, so people actually receive the book, which is, as I said before, 64 tools in it to allow people to exercise influence, many of which some of which I've already mentioned. So many tools that have been categorized around those 4 influencing strategies. So the workshop takes people through, they get a chance to complete a diagnostic or a 360, whichever they choose to do. So they come prepared at that workshop with their particular influencing profile, and we walk through the day as to how they can build upon that. So I just mentioned that as something that might be of interest to people, and if you are interested, just send me an email and I'm more than happy to send you more information about that. That's just a bit of an outline, but I'm more than happy to send you some details and costings. Which pretty much brings us to the end. My book, of course, is available through Amazon. You can actually go to my website if you choose. If you go to my website, I'm more than happy to sign the book for you and send it off. If you go through Amazon, you can go through Amazon. My email address is there, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions that you've got from today. Jim Kouzes, who is a guru in this whole area of leadership, had a very nice endorsement for me. I guess I'm using third-party endorsement now. Said some nice things about the book, which is great. It's hardcover, and I think that you could find some real value in that. But anyway, enough of the sales pitch. Questions. So I'd be interested now to hear what questions you'd like to ask. I'm open to that. So if you haven't already, type in a question over on the right-hand side, and I'll get that and I'll answer that quite straight away. There's one question here which I will respond to. The question is, how do I influence a large audience that I haven't met before? Okay, good question. So this is around, you've got to say 100 people in the audience or maybe more. You've got to give a presentation. Normally those presentations are there to actually convince people of a particular course of action or a particular point of view and so forth. So it is a classic influencing forum. Now, the answer to the question is this, that I think when you're placed in a situation where you've got a lot of people in the room, it's highly likely that you're going to have a significant number of different profiles in the room. In other words, there's going to be investigators, there's going to be calculators, there's going to be motivators, and there's going to be collaborators. We can say that for sure. Knowing that, of course, what it means is that your approach or your presentation has got to be flexible enough to be able to do all 4. So what that means in practice is that I might start by giving some basic facts. So I might actually, have a slide if I'm using a presentation, and I might have some particular statistics that are quite compelling or some facts that really does demonstrate that I'm across my subject area, I know what I'm talking about, and I've actually gone and researched it. So I would throw them up and talk about it from that point of view. I might then link my proposal or my idea or my strategy to people's self-interest, or I could link it to the organisational vision or mission. By doing that, of course, I'm now using the motivational strategy. So I'm now linking my proposal with a bigger picture. So I need to make that connection. Otherwise, people are sitting there saying, this is nice, all very good. I can see they're well researched. But what does it mean for me? How does this fit in, or how does this lock into my busy life? So that question has to be answered. I might then take some questions from the audience and ask people for their opinions. Now, by doing that, I'm obviously collaborating, so people will have a point of view. Now, obviously, if it's a large group, I can't give everybody an opportunity to have a say, but if I give a number of people an opportunity to ask questions and make comments, then what I'm doing is I'm now injecting the collaboration strategy into my presentation. And finally, I might finish with a slide, and on that slide I might have some positives about the change that I'm proposing. So I might have 3 or 4 key bullet points about what the pros are for going down this road. And then on the other hand, on the other side of the slide, I might have some of the consequences, or what could be some of the problems or pitfalls if we don't accept the proposition that I'm actually putting forward. So now I'm finishing up my presentation using a calculation strategy. So I've given the facts, which is the investigation. I have linked it to a bigger picture, which is the motivation strategy. I have engaged my audience as best I can by asking questions and getting people to make comments. And I'm now finishing my presentation by talking about the pros of my proposal and the particular consequences of not going down that road. So by doing that, I'm going to be likely to be very influential. I'm likely to hit the mark with every single person, all things being equal, of course. Every single person in that audience will be engaged at some point because I've hit on their particular style or approach to influencing. So that's the answer to that one. I would use that approach. Got another question here. The question is, do leaders have to use all 4 styles and approaches in their team? Well, I think that's the theme of what I'm suggesting there, Steve. I'm actually suggesting that you actually should use all 4 because you are likely to be far more capable. So, I mean, if you're working one-on-one, so if you're working with one person in your workplace, you've probably already worked out what drives them. You've probably worked out that they're an investigator or a calculator or a motivator or a collaborator. You've probably sort of worked that out because you know them. So therefore, the idea in those cases in a one-on-one is to pitch your suggestion or use your influence along the lines of what you know will influence them, and you'll find that that'll resonate greatly. So if they want to have a talk and toss around a few ideas, in other words, they're collaborators, that might be the way to go. If they want to know the facts about the situation, then go ahead and do that. If they want to know what's in it for them and what the consequences, go for that. Go for the calculation approach. And if they want to know why we're doing this and what the big picture is, then use the motivation strategy. So by using all 4, you know, depending on the situation and the person you're working with, you're likely to be far more influential and far more capable. And I guess that's the theme of the presentation, is try to do all 4 as much as you possibly can. And if you show me people that are very, very good at influencing, and we all know people that are good at influencing. I'm not talking about manipulators. I'm talking about ethical influencers, people that do it the right way. If you look at what they do, I'll guarantee that what they do is they're very flexible in their approach. They're very good at being able to fluctuate from a push to a pull style, and very good at being able to move from a logical to an emotional approach, depending on the situation and, of course, the people that they're actually trying to influence, which is the 3 key variables in any influencing situation. So we might finish there. Thank you very much. As I said before, you're more than happy to send me an email. I enjoy receiving feedback, and you know, if you're interested, as I say, in the one-day workshop or a conference presentation, let me know. Happy to accommodate there and talk about that. And as I say, my book is out and it's ready to go, and you can purchase that through my website or Amazon. Thank you very much for your attendance, and I hope that you found this very worthwhile. Thank you.